Hello and welcome back to the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast with me, your host Ryan, the founder of Rocket SaaS, and I'm in the studio again with my man Jamie Skeels. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
We are going through a bit of strategy today is what we're going to be teaching you about. So we're going to take a kind of hypothetical example of a B2B SaaS company who's got about 20, 30 customers at the moment, got about $3,000 a month in marketing budget, and they just don't really have much of a marketing strategy going on at the moment, or maybe they've had one but it's just not working, so they need to redo their strategy. So I'm just going to talk to Jamie about what he would do, and the focus is on being lean, which means relatively small budget and fast, not some like long, like huge strategy document that takes months to create. Just, let's get going pretty quickly here. We need to get leads in the door.
The reality of a startup.
The reality of a startup, yes. So Jamie, let's start. So yeah, tell me typically, where would you start?
Yeah, so for a typical like B2B SaaS startup, so for this example, I think we're going to kind of like, let's look at like a typical client we might work with. So like they're maybe they've got like 25 to 30 customers, like kind of like a burgeoning startup starting to do well. A lot of the businesses come from like outbound sales and maybe through the founders network, starting to get that traction, and now they're looking to scale up and invest in marketing. So I think the key thing for me is like, and this is like what we're really keen to get across, is that if you're a startup, you cannot afford to just throw things at the wall. That is what tons of startups that like who might come work with us or that we speak to are suffering from, is that there's random acts of marketing. Let's do some webinars, let's do some ads, let's do some tactics and hope that it brings in some leads. That's the tool of like
finding a new tech, or doing a cold outbound sequence, or getting a new SDR, and or doing some broad LinkedIn target. I think we talked about this on the previous episode of just trying to find the next thing, the next one campaign, the next one channel, the next one tech, the next AI thing that's gonna get me loads of leads. And sadly it rarely works that way. It might get you a few leads for a bit, but then it'll just fade away. I think you're going to go for a bit more of a proper strategy, because that stuff isn't strategy. That stuff is just like, you called it throwing stuff at the wall. Just it's more tactics. Tactics, but you can have tactics within the strategy, but you have to have a strategy
to guide though. And this is what I mean, like, so you can't afford to do that. You absolutely also cannot afford to spend 3 months putting together the perfect strategy, because you're a startup and you have the reality of you need to get business through the door. You need to be executing. You need to use your advantage, which is speed. That is one of the core advantages you have as a startup. You have no awareness. You probably have limited budgets. You have limited resources. Speed is your friend, which means that what we advocate for is build a lean strategy. Build it quickly to give you direction based on kind of real insights, and then execute fast so you can get feedback on that strategy and iterate. That is kind of what we advocate for. So in the context of this like fictional business, so like I mentioned, kind of just getting started with marketing, I think the first thing that we always would go to is we would at first do some segmentation and deep dive into the customer data to understand who their ideal buyer is. Like we speak about this a lot on the pod. I'd recommend checking out previous episodes to get more on this. But ultimately, first thing we're going to do, break down the customer data, and break that down into like identifying on certain characteristics who is your best buyer, so you can build a really complete view of who your ICP actually is. And from there, what I'm going to do is actually look at, say, for example, in the context of this business, say we're working with a more limited budget, something maybe around sort of £3,000 per month. That's when you start making strategic choices about who you go after in that segment, with that segmentation. So if you identify within your customer data that there are specific segments you play well in, can you meaningfully reach those segments with £3,000 per month? Where's that going to get you? Can you reach that whole market? Do you need to go narrower? Potentially, do you need to go broader? All of these questions have fundamentally linked back into that segmentation, and that should guide you. And you need to go through that exercise of kind of dicing up your customer data, identify your best buyer, and then figure out, does that actually work in terms of hitting your goals with your budget?
Yeah, so we talked about that in episode number 64 of the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast, so listen back to that one. So in this fictional example, they've got 30 clients, so you can take those 30 clients and put them into a tool like Clay and do what's called enriching that data to give you lots of additional information about your clients that you've got, or it could be your like SQLs the deals that you need. One, they can give you some interesting information about how they actually categorize themselves on LinkedIn, company headcount, funding and revenue and all those things. And you can get some surprises in terms of, I didn't actually realize that so many of my customers fitted into this sort of demographic and ICP. I thought they were over here. Okay, so that's ICP.
Yeah,
talked about that quite a lot on
figure that out, and then make sure that is fundamental, is figuring that out and making sure that do you actually have what you need to be able to crack that market is like an important decision to make. So yeah, I think for this startup as well, the next thing one of the things I'll be looking to do is to try and kind of get a grip on their pipeline and build a bit of a pipeline model for them. So I think a lot of businesses in this kind of stage often don't have the greatest grip on these numbers, which can result in a lot of kind of like misguided tactics. You're kind of doing things that you shouldn't really be doing because you can't either afford them or it's not actually going to get you to the goals that you need. Building a pipeline model, which is basically working backwards from your overall goal, your overall revenue goal. So let's say you have a revenue goal. What you want to do is basically figure out from that goal, how many customers do I need to hit that goal? And then looking back through your historical data, figuring out the conversion rates from customer to opportunity, from opportunity to SQL, from SQL to MQL, whatever your funnel looks like in terms of how you define those stages, but figuring out those conversion stages and the percentages between them, and understanding, okay, for one customer, how many opportunities do I need? For those opportunities, how many SQLs do I need? How many MQLs do I need? That's going to be super important because that is going to give you your overall kind of numbers and goals, basically, to hit your overall revenue goal. That's super important. What that also does, though, is it then unlocks the ability, particularly as kind of like with this, building this model out, what you'll want to do is kind of align with your business internally and understand what are we willing to pay per customer? What is our kind of target customer acquisition cost? When you have that number, you can then also work backwards because you know kind of your conversion rates with the funnel, you know the numbers you need, you can understand kind of how much can we afford to pay for each, an op, an SQL, an MQL. When you have those two things together, that is going to be super important. So that's why I'd want to have the grip on those numbers for this business. It will dictate what I do for the strategy.
Right. And also, if you're a marketer, you need to pitch this strategy to your CEO, your founder. And often founders and CEOs are not going to kind of go through that detail, and they're going to be like, well, I'll give you $3,000 a month and I expect 20 SQLs a month, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or I expect this much in revenue, in sales. And you have to work backwards and be like, well, that's not realistic. And these are the reasons why, because to get that target would mean that the CAC is going to be £10, and that's completely unrealistic. And these are the reasons why. So working backwards helps you present the strategy to leadership.
Yeah, it just gives you the reality of kind of, this is what we need to hit. This is what we can afford to spend for each of these things, each of these buckets, each of these stages. And then that just like, if I'm going back to our example, so this business has £3,000 to spend per month. And that's going to be kind of like the core kind of driver of our engine. Like, I need to then look at that and think about, okay, the channels I select and the activities I commit to that are going to cost money, like, is that actually going to hit those numbers? And also, can we afford to spend, and you can look at things like averages on those channels and benchmarks and things like that, is actually going to be able to, are we going to be able to spend efficiently enough to hit those numbers? Because I know those numbers now. It's very important. It guides what you do. So yeah, after I've done the segmentation, I've kind of built that pipeline model as well. I understand my numbers. I understand what I can spend. I have insights that are going to help drive the strategy.
Nice. Okay. So you've done that, and then you want to then get into, I guess, is it going to be what content are you going to create in terms of understanding the customer and what they really care about?
Yeah. So I think the next thing, and this is kind of going back to being lean and being agile, like, you need to do some customer research, right? But I feel very strongly on this, that like the reality in a SaaS business, especially a fast moving SaaS business, is you're not going to have the bandwidth or the the ability to be able to go out for 2 months and interview kind of like 20 customers and do this big market research. It's just not the reality in most SaaS businesses. If you can do that and you've got the time and the roadmap and the resources internally to do that whilst they're executing, brilliant. You're not. But in most cases, you're not going to have that bandwidth. So I think what I'd advocate for is like, do the stuff that you can do quickly, particularly prioritize things like listening to sales calls. That's a really good bank of information that's going to help you understand how and why customers buy, what triggers them to reach out to you, what their buying process looked like, what they found valuable in the product, what competitors they were considering, all of those things. And then also alongside that, listening to the sales calls, looking at customer reviews, like looking at things like G2, Capterra, etc. Like there's really clever things you can do now with big tools like Clay, where you can kind of scrape all of those, put them in a spreadsheet, categorize them, bucket them. But if you can do that, great. That will save some time. And that was a good example of being lean and being agile. But equally, you can kind of just go through them, review them, understand what people found valuable, what brought them to the product, all of those things. You need to get some grip on how and why customers buy. And if you can spend some time interviewing like 5 customers, great. Go and do that. But equally, this is what I said about like going back to being lean and doing this quickly. Your advantage is speed. So ultimately, focus on doing those things, those at least the bare minimum of kind of sales calls and reviewing the reviews, maybe speaking to your sales team internally, just to understand your buyers, because that is going to be super important to when you've done your segmentation. You need to understand what you're actually going to create in terms of your positioning, your messaging, the content, the things you're serving to those buyers. And that's the research that's going to guide that.
Yep. Nice. Okay. So you've identified your ICP, you've done some market research to understand the content of the things that your target audience care about. Then we need to probably look at what content we're going to create and what channels we're going to use to get that content out there, would you say?
So at this point, this is what I kind of mean in terms of building a lean strategy. Within a week or two, a couple of weeks, right, you'd have had like ideally kind of a model that keeps you a grip on your numbers and what you can spend. You're going to know who your best buyer is and who you want to focus on. And you're going to understand how and why that buyer buys and what their behaviors are. And that's going to give you insights to then pick things like channels, tactics, content, because you're going to understand in a bit more of an in-depth way than you did before. Okay, where does my buyer spend time? What influences my buyer? What triggers them to kind of come to us and reach out to us? That's going to help you decide on things like what channels you focus on. Like maybe you know that actually that they spent a lot of time on LinkedIn and they're really influenced by thought leadership from founders. Like that's something you find in your research. That's going to guide the channels and the tactics that you select. So again, what it does is even just building a lean strategy, it gives you guidance to then pick the tactics rather than just chuck tactics all.
Right. So the research can identify things like, okay, our target audience, our ICP, they like consuming podcasts, or they like consuming long form white papers, or they like consuming video shorts on YouTube. So the research tells you where they are, essentially.
Where they are, what influenced them.
Yeah, and that obviously tells you what types of content you need to create. Is it blogs? Is it white papers? Is it podcasts? Is it webinars? Yeah, webinars is an interesting one. Like some industries, they're very webinar heavy. Some industries, webinars do not work, and you don't know until you do the research and find out. So that gives you a clue. I would also add on, what assets have you got in the business to create that content? And really, I'm looking at the founder here. I'm looking at the founders or the leadership. Is your founder or co-founders or the leadership, the thought leaders in the business, are they charismatic? Are they able and willing to get on camera and do videos, like talking head videos to camera? Are they willing to get on podcasts like this? Are they happy and open to do webinars? If the answer is yes, then and the market research backs up the fact that those are the right channels as well, then you got to go heavy on that. When we work with lots of different B2B SaaS companies, we get new SaaS companies sort of onboarding with us all the time, and that's one thing I'm always kind of looking for is there a founder that is able and willing and charismatic to do that stuff, and if it's the right channels for them, which it often is for B2B SaaS and LinkedIn and everything, definitely into that. However, sadly, most businesses, B2B SaaS businesses, the founder or leadership don't have the time, the willingness, the charisma, they cringe at the thought of doing videos and webinars, podcasts, and that's fine. I get that. There's a long-term play to get over that cringe factor, but if it's not there, it's not there, and you can't force it. So therefore you're going to have to probably lean on more like written content, or maybe there's someone else in the business that can do that stuff if you really think that is the right path to do, because that's part of a strategy that I see go wrong all the time. It's like a marketer will create the strategy and be like, right, we want to do these webinars and podcasts, and the founder's just not on board, and it just gets delayed and pushed back, and it never works. And I've seen marketers get sacked because they've tried to force their founders to do things they don't want to do, and they're like, I don't like this person. Yeah, go away. Stop trying to get me to do webinars. I don't want to do it. So, but yeah, hopefully, if you do have a thought leader that is willing to do those things, then definitely lean into that. So right, you talked about types of content to create. You talked about channels to get people on. The other thing we've not mentioned yet is looking at Google Ads. You don't have to be too clever about this stuff with the funnels if there's search volume there. So doing Google Ads research in terms of search volume, if it's there, then Google Ads is an obvious channel, and it's a pretty much more linear channel. You don't have to be too kind of clever with it. I think you've not talked too much yet, I suppose, about messaging and positioning. I did a whole kind of webinar on this the other day of all the stuff that Jamie's talking about, all the strategy. Don't forget the good old website. Don't forget the messaging on the website, because when people buy from you, they're going to go onto your website multiple times. So don't try and be kind of too clever in thinking about all these things. Just make sure that website's got very clear messaging at least. If you're a B2B SaaS brand, make sure that the product looks good on the website. Start there, and that's a lean thing you can do. It doesn't take long. If you've got a CMS that you can edit the words and edit the images in the first like couple of weeks of putting this together. So let's not forget to do that as well. But yeah, what's the next thing, would you say?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is kind of like you touched on a good example actually. So like Google Ads for like a lot of B2B SaaS businesses, like that's kind of like an obvious kind of place to start, because it's bottom of funnel, it's people searching for you right now. It's a good indicator that there might be a market actually searching for what you're selling. But I think this is kind of what I mean going back to, is that like I think when you look at the foundational work that you've just done, so particularly looking at like things like if you've got a good grip on your numbers, so you've got a good grip on like the number of leads you need to generate, the number of opportunities, what you can afford to spend, like that is really helpful for actually evaluating if Google Ads is a good channel for you to select. So this is what I mean in terms of when you've done that foundational work, selecting the tactics and the channels, it all flows from there. It becomes a lot easier. So I'd be able to look at, right, okay, well, Google Ads, we've actually got in Google, we can see that there are a list of keywords that actually have decent enough search volume, and it might be a viable channel for us. But if I can evaluate those keywords, I can look at and go, all right, well, this is the search volume we have for them. I can do kind of a rough forecast and map that back to our pipeline model. And I can make a judgment. Do I actually think that Google is meaningfully going to impact those targets? And if it doesn't, then something that looked like a viable channel maybe isn't a viable channel. And that's kind of the step that I'd be taking from there. It's kind of once I've done the foundational work in that first couple of weeks, building a pipeline model, building a segmentation, understanding why and how our customers buy. And then like you mentioned, from there, everything flows in terms of building the positioning, building the kind of messaging, plan out the content. I can use all of that foundational work to pick my channels, my tactics, my content. All becomes a lot easier, and I've got guidance rather than just throwing things at the wall.
Yeah. And I would also say partnerships is really, really powerful. So creating partnerships with other businesses that are targeting the same audience as you. So if you're lean and you're small, and Jamie said at the start of this episode, you don't have that brand awareness, people don't know who you are. There are other companies out there who have the exact same audience that you want and that you're going after, and you can do partnerships with those companies. Obviously not competitors, has to be like another company that's serving the same space but doing a different thing. Like if you were targeting construction companies, you could partner with an accountancy firm who is accountancy specialist for construction companies, and you can co-host things. You can co-host webinars, you can co-host in-person breakfast events, and the magic of that is that they promote your event to their network. So that's basically cost you nothing, and suddenly your event, your webinar, is getting promoted to an audience that you want. So that's a really good tactic to put into the strategy of, we need to partner with similar companies that have the same audience as us. So, and then think about what content can we co-create together. So that's another great tactic that always works really, really well for kind of startups at the early stage, until you get to the point where you can start creating your own events. And you don't have to piggyback off other people's networks. That's just one thing I'd chuck in there. All right, so to wrap it up then, the ICP, you've got it nice and narrow, you've done your market research, you know what they care about, you know where they are, what channels they are, what content they like and don't like to consume. You know if your founders is going to be on board in terms of supporting in the content creation side of things, or if you're going to have to do it through other means. So now I think we would suggest putting that into a funnel: top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel. So top of the funnel, what educational content are you going to create? And then in the middle of the funnel, make sure you're getting really strong case studies, testimonials of those narrow ICPs. So work really hard on building those up. We've not touched on that today, but that's a really obvious thing that you have to have in the funnel. Also, the middle of the funnel, I would describe things like those sort of lead magnet type things, your guides, your webinars, your ROI calculators need to be in there. And then the bottom of the funnel, which is the website CRO piece, having really strong messaging on the website, good product-led marketing on the website, explainer videos, good landing pages to support each of the ad campaigns, and just map all of that out as part of your strategy. Map out the topics and all of the different assets that you need, and then it's a case of building that list of people that you're going to target, and pumping all of that content with retargeting ads through LinkedIn. We are not going to cover that today. The LinkedIn ads retargeting is other things. We've got plenty of episodes on that. 60 something. Episode 64, I think, is a 3-part LinkedIn ads series, and we're always banging on about LinkedIn ads. The previous episode, we talked about a lot of what Rocket SaaS are doing with LinkedIn ads and how we've had massive success. So I recommend checking out that. But anyway, from a strategic piece, that is our recommendation on what you should be doing. And if you map all of that out and just go back to the funnel, you can present that to your kind of leadership, or if it's you yourself doing it, that's a good way of looking at it. And then getting to work on creating all of that content and hitting the right ICP with ads. But if you don't have the resources to do it in-house, that's what me and Jamie and Rocket SaaS are here to do, to support you. We will become your marketing department if you don't have one. If you do have a small marketing department, we will plug in to give you more resources and fill those skill gaps that you don't have around strategy, content, ads management, building lead magnets, website CRO, just to really help you scale your business through marketing. So check us out, rocket-saas.io. If not, I'll just see you next week on the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast.